Well, hello, everybody. It's Grandpa Scott. I'm here today with a new story and an excellent adventure. It has to do with amazing excitement that's going to happen in this book. And I think you're going to be on the edge of your seat to see what exactly happens at the very end. Today's book is called Peter Rabbit. It's about a rabbit, obviously, but there's a whole lot more. So let's get right to it, okay? The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in the sand bank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Huh. "Now, my dears," said old Miss Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the field or down the lane, but don't go to Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Wow, they better be careful. Then old Miss Rabbit took her basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. One for each of them, I bet. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Oh my, should he be doing that? I don't think so. First he ate some lettuce, and then some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. He just gorged himself on all kinds of food and got a tummy ache. But around the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Oh my! Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages. But he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving his rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way to get back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and on the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on all 4 legs and went faster so that he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by a large buttons on his jacket, and it was a blue jacket with brass buttons. Quite new. Oh, he was in a very much of a pickle, they say. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop open on top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not been too much water in it. Wow, he jumped, like they said, from the frying pan into the fire. Well, now he's jumped into a pot, but it's full of water. Mr. McGregor was quite sure Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath the flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed. Kerchoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to work. Oh my, Peter wow, it was an exciting chase. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not had the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. Oh, he's probably cold and shivering. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in the wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out all over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Was he ever going to get out? Was he ever going to get home? Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Cats can be dangerous to rabbits. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out, and he climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and behind him was the gate. Oh, that's where Peter wants to go to get out of there. Peter got down very quickly off the wheelbarrow, and he started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up a little jacket and shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. Oh, Peter, what did you do? He was so tired that he flopped down upon a nice soft sand floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Peter just couldn't keep track of his stuff because he was always being naughty and getting into mischief. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed, made some chamomile tea, and he gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. Look at Peter, just sitting there in his bed, feeling all so worn out and tired. He just had a terrible day. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. Well, they were good little rabbits. So that's the end of our story about Peter the rabbit. But what did Peter do? Well, first, he disobeyed his mother, and that's not good. We should never disobey our parents because they know what's best for us. And also, he was stealing. He was stealing Mr. McGregor's vegetables from his garden. That's what upset Mr. McGregor so much, is that Peter just took anything he wanted. So, we have to remember that we have to respect what is somebody else's and to obey Mom and Dad. So this is the end of the story of Peter Rabbit. But you know, this isn't the end, for now's the time to go outside and have some fun, because this little rabbit story, it's all done.